professor at NYU in the Department of Media, Culture and Communication with a joint appointment in computer science. And also I am the director of the Information Law Institute, which is housed at the NYU School of Law. And I'm so excited about this event, and I owe it all to Sue Gluck sitting at the back. In several different ways. Sue is representing Microsoft, the Microsoft Corporation, and they are sponsoring this event. So this is one way. But the other way is that Sue had come up with the idea of the conference to bring some of the work that had been presented last April at Berkeley and to have it presented here, and then that gave us the opportunity to have our fabulous keynote, which we're going to enjoy in just a few minutes, and then tomorrow for the entire day we have a fantastic set of project presentations and panels. Some of it will represent work that's already quite mature, and in the afternoon we're going to have exploratory panels looking at some of the open data normative imperatives and how they may be served not only by agents or actors or government institutions, but also where and how the contribution to the purposes of open data could also be made by private industry, by important commercial actors who perhaps are now even, I don't know if this is true, I might say something untrue, but who have a large amount of data. I won't say more than the public sector, but if you count global data, probably more than any single government. This is a fact I'm going to have to check on. But there's an important conversation that has already begun, and many of the people who are on the panels in the afternoon have participated in that, and we're really interested to push that conversation even a little bit further. The Center for Law and Technology, the Berkeley Center for Law and Technology are our partners in this, and so right from the get-go, we were delighted that they collaborated, and this is Chris Hufnagel, who is representing the leadership of the Berkeley Center, and also I would like to acknowledge Joris, who's been helping with all the coordination of the activities that we're going to enjoy starting from now and throughout the rest of tomorrow. And then tomorrow there are a whole bunch of other people that we will acknowledge, and we hope that you'll all be able to be there with us. So this evening we are going to have the keynote presentation, and that's going to be given by Dr. Amen-Ra Mashariki. And Nikki Bauer is going to be a respondent, an enricher of the discussion. And following that, we're going to have an opportunity to have discussion with the audience. And we expect the whole evening, this portion of it, to end at about 6:15. Dr. Mashariki, as you can see from the program, is the Chief Analytics Officer of New York City and leads the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics. He's an accomplished leader within the private sector and government and academia, with experience in bringing big data processing and analytics for large and complex data management efforts. He started his professional career as a software engineer at Motorola, and most recently, he served as Chief Technology Officer at the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. He previously worked at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, where he led a team working on data mining and data fusion projects in the bioinformatics domain. He holds a doctorate of engineering from Morgan State University, a Master of Science in Computer Science from Howard University, and a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science from Lincoln University. Nikki Bauer is an attorney at the California Public Utilities Commission, and currently he's on a one-year leave to pursue an LLM with the University of California, Berkeley School of Law in focusing on technology law. He holds a Bachelor of Science from Indiana University, Bloomington, with a triple major in economics, political science, and telecommunications, and a JD from the University of California, Hastings College of Law. Dr. Mashari.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Helen, one, for that perfect pronunciation of my last name. I was always impressed. Every now and then I get it wrong. And also thank you for inviting me to engage what my team members at MODA only refer to as like a particularly impressive group of folks in and around open data. I work for them, they don't work for me, and they've asked me to, I've got all sorts of questions that I'm supposed to ask a bunch of folks here. But thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this, yours as well. So, as I mentioned, I have a particular strong relationship with my team. The Mayor's Office of Data Analytics is about, there's only 6 folks. We're a very small office. So we tend to say lean and mean, as Stefan knows. And so when invited to come speak, I sat down with them and I said, responsible use of open data in government and private sector. Has to do with, how we feel about that. Not so much the implementation, but more so, what should we be talking about? What's important to us? What do we want to engage this august group about? And true to form, MODA, as we call ourselves, and we are called as well. MODA tends to think in a very sort of non-traditional, non-obvious kind of way. So where you would think the conversation would start around, definition of responsibility. What's responsibility? Who's responsible? How? What does that actually mean? And what are the many definitions of the word responsible? They actually honed in on the word use. Andrew, how you doing, man? Sorry to call you out. I like If it were not for him, we wouldn't, MODA wouldn't be, the New York City Open Data wouldn't be where it is now, for certain. Makes my job easier, so I have to always give him a shout out when I see him. We honed in on the word use. So for us, being charged with implementing the open data program for New York City, it's really important that we identify real use of open data and help people identify real use of open data. So for us, as responsible stewards of the open data program, our job is to encourage use. And so this conversation we're going to have today, from my perspective, is really about showing you how we think about use. And so I know Helen talked about my background a little bit, but what I would like to do is start with giving you a sense of my background and the synergies and where, I don't know why I just used that word, but where we use different parts of my careers where I engage people on data. I started off as an engineer, a research engineer at Motorola, and I worked in the Security Science Center. And so I've worked with a bunch of engineers. We built algorithms that allowed for us to encrypt data. We innovated. Our team, 3 patent disclosures. we innovated this concept called over-the-air repeating. The idea was about securing data on two ends of the transmission, and then sending it over, but then also sending secure keys over the air and so on and so forth. So remember, this was early 90s, so this stuff was, this is groundbreaking stuff for the early 90s. And so one, at Motorola, the role in terms of being responsible around data was about keeping it secure, right? And ensuring people had access and the right people. Our clients, I worked in commercial government sector, so that means I wasn't in private, I wasn't in hand phones and so forth. So it means our clients were FBI, CIA, Her Majesty's Customs and Excise, and so on and so forth. And so ensuring that they had secure transmissions when they were using Motorola two-way radios. Right? And so the responsibility we had there was to ensure that this data was secure. Next, I worked at University of Chicago Cancer Research Center. I was Assistant Director of Informatics at the Cancer Research Center. I don't know if many of you are familiar with a program called Cancer Bioinformatics Grid. It was a program, it's now defunct, but it's not really, it's renamed, called National Cancer Informatics Program out of NIH. And when I was at the Cancer Research Center, I had a lot of duties. One of my duties was to go around to all of the, just to give you a sense of Cancer Bioinformatics Grid, the idea is that cancer research centers around the country, they get money, they get grants, they get money from the federal government, they do clinical trials, they do research, and it stays that way. Cancer Bioinformatics Grid says, okay, if you get federal money, you might have to share that research, share your clinical trials data. The idea being the shared data around cancer research is going to be more effective in allowing us to identify a cure as opposed to just these disparate cancer research centers doing their own thing, so on and so forth. So it's about sharing clinical trial and cancer research data. So one of my jobs was to go around to doctors and get them to share that data with me so that I can share it with the rest of the world, right? Put it on this grid, if you will. I have two particularly my favorite responses. I have two favorite responses from doctors. My first favorite response was from one doctor where he actually told me, remember this, you guys are all from pretty particularly fancy universities, so you get my drift when I say this. And one doctor actually said to me, I'm trying to get the Nobel Prize. Why in the world do you think that I would share my data? And I absolutely had no response for that. Right? Like, I'm getting my hat, and now that's not even my favorite. So my favorite was a doctor who actually said to me, true story, he sat across from me and said, I haven't changed my hairstyle in the last 20 years. What makes you think I'm going to change the way I practice medicine? That actually makes a big sense. And so I spent a lot of my time at University of Chicago convincing these doctors to share their data, right? And so again, the responsible thing there was getting people not to hold on to their data, to share their data with the rest of the world for the common good. There was this ultimate good. There was this need around sharing data, right? So spent a lot of time talking to folks around that. Then at Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, I particularly worked with data scientists. They weren't called data scientists then. They were called informaticists to build electronic surveillance system for early notification of community-based endemics. The idea was we got data from all these different sources. We got data from hospitals. We got data from emails coming in from doctors. We got data from CBS and so on and so forth. And we mined that data. And we built analytics around that data. And we did geospatial as well as temporal analysis to show, you know what, a flu is spreading in this particular community, right? And so the idea, again, the responsible thing around data was taking data from these disparate sources and creating a mechanism that would help the public, right? That was for the public good. That something that would help people understand if there was a communicable disease going around in their neighborhood, in their particular community. So again, this concept of being responsible around data was doing some analysis and using that analysis for the ultimate public good. And lastly, before taking this position, my recent role was at Office of Personnel Management. I spent a year as a White House Fellow. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the White House Fellow program, but I was a White House Fellow. So I spent a year as the tech advisor to the director of OPM. And then I stayed on an additional year as I got an appointment, presidential appointment to be their chief technology officer. For those 2 years, I spent the time, OPM manages, among a lot of things, manages the retirement process for public servants, federal public servants. And you guys will Google this, there's such a thing called the Boyer's Cave. And it's basically where every single document about every single federal employee lives. Literally, I laid eyes on Elliot Ness's federal, payroll information. Every federal employee's document is there, and it's all in paper. It's in a cave, literally a cave. The topmost floor is the first floor. And it's miles and miles of cabinets, right? And so my job was to digitize all of that. Well, you laugh, but that was actually the easiest part. The easiest part was getting the other agencies and federal employees to buy into the strategy. But there were technologies, Captricity is one of them, I don't know if you're familiar with Captricity, that could do that in a jiff. Right? That wasn't the complex part, was digitizing. It's all sorts of artificial intelligence and ways to take paper and handwritten notes and turn it into data. Companies got that down pat. It was about convincing people to do it. But the idea was that once we did that, then we built mechanisms that allowed for. I always had this. I would always, when I went around agencies and talked to them and evangelize this processing, because they all had to be on board as well. I would always say, my dream is to have a federal employee who's worked 35 years for the federal government, sitting up at 2 o'clock in the morning watching TV, and a commercial about the Bahamas comes on, and they're in their underwear, and if they decide they want to retire right then and there, they should be able to. Because outside of that, it would take months. Probably like on the order of 6 to 9 months for a federal employee to retire, because it's shuffling a lot of paper from agency to agency to OPM. We send it to Boyers, which is in Pennsylvania, right outside of Pittsburgh, and we got to get it back, and so on and so forth. But digitizing that, they can retire right then and there, get their paycheck, their retirement check, or virtually immediately, right? So that was my vision. And so again, it was about taking data and putting it in front of the normal citizen and enhancing their quality of life. So the responsible use of data there was enhancing federal employees, public servants who spent their lives, a lot of them 30, 40, 50 years doing great work for this country, giving them the opportunity to enhance their quality of life. But also the problem is when you're doing anything in paper, you don't get the calculations quite right. And so a lot of people would get, when they're supposed to get $670 a month, they would get 24 cents. And then it would take, you can imagine, it would take the federal government a long time to fix that, right? And so, but bills had to be paid, rent had to be paid. And so we're talking quality of life here, right? So it's about taking data and enhancing people's quality of life. And so the key thread amongst all of those opportunities that I talked about, it was funny because my team, they were like, did you plan out your career that way? I said, no, my career was actually, there was nothing deliberate about anything I chose to do. I actually applied to be a White House Fellow when I was at University of Chicago, and I was bored one day and I was reading a website, and someone from University of Chicago was a fellow, and I applied. So there was like no rhyme or reason to a lot of the stuff that I did. But the thread, amongst all of those opportunities that I was a part of, was access, ensuring people had access to data, whether it was FBI agent who needed secure data immediately. I remember when I was at Motorola, we used our over-the-air rekeying technology when the Olympics was in Utah. Remember, that was the first Olympics post 9/11. There were more FBI agents than there were Olympians, literally. And it was an incredible technology that was needed then. And so to see that work, that technology work, that the security work. And so it was always about access, ensuring the right people at the right time had access to the right data. All of those opportunities is exactly that. And I'll pull that thread a little bit more. So the question around here, around responsibility was, this consistent thread, how do I take that to the next, to my next career? And MODA, the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics, being the Chief Analytics Officer, encompasses all of those things I talked about: data sharing, data analytics, securing data. And so at MODA, we work to understand the features and complexities of an urban landscape. So our job on a daily basis is the needle in a haystack problem. We look for stuff. One quick example of one of the things we do, we won Citizen Budget Commission, Project Innovation when I was coming in. Folks mentioned the mayor's UPK, pre-K for all that. We spent a lot of time doing analytics. When you're trying to sign up 4-year-olds to enroll into pre-K for all, there's a complexity to that, because how do you identify who has a 4-year-old? 4-year-olds don't have digital footprint, right? They're not online, they're not on Twitter, they're not on Facebook. How do you know who's a 4-year-old in the city, so that you can then target them to enroll them into this program, right? And so we take on a lot of those really focused, targeted, needle in a haystack problems in and around the city. We work with city agencies to help them turn data-driven insight into action. That's key, because whenever people talk about analytics, they also always talk about insight. Analytics gives you insight, but that's halfway. Once you get insight, there has to be action. And how do you translate insight into action? And that's really what we do, is we work with agencies to show them how they can take their data, identify insight, but then translate that into action. Because ultimately, we support more effective delivery of services to New Yorkers for greater equity, safety, and quality of life. The other role that we play is we grow the analytics capacity in and around the city. And so when we do this work, we have MODA values. So when I started in November of 2004, 2 days ago, 2014, excuse me, 2 days ago was my 1-year anniversary, I instituted this concept of MODA values. We had to do analytics in and around a value set. And the values are build sustainable capacities and solutions. That means when I'm gone and this mayor is gone, these capacities and these capabilities exist. Every chief analytics officer that comes into office cannot recreate and start from scratch. I won't allow it, and it shouldn't be the case. Privacy and security, key for us. User-centered analytics, that is, we don't do analytics for the sake of doing analytics. There has to be a use case. There has to be a driver. So we only work with agencies that actually have a mission and a goal that they need accomplished with these analytics. Trusted analysts. We need to be, when we're dealing with data coming from agencies, and they give us data that they give no one, they need to know that they can trust us. And so we build this brand of trusted analysts. And then MODA quality and excellence. When I worked at Johns Hopkins, we used to have this saying called, we only take on projects, or we only go for grants that are Hopkins hard. I mean, we don't want to do what everyone else does. We want to take on stuff that no one else can take on. It has to be Hopkins hard, something that was really complex for us. So internally at MODA, we have a MODA hard sort of view. That is, we take on really challenging stuff and we exhibit quality and excellence. So now let me move into the open data space. right? So I'll provide some overall context. New York City has an open data law. And I think one of the big things that I would love, one of the analysts wanted me to figure out is how you guys think about all of the smart lawyers and policy people in the room, think about the difference between a law and policy, and what are the pros and the cons of one versus the other. New York City has an open data law. Very few cities in the country have a law. Most cities in the federal government is a policy. And so there's distinct differences. I think Andrew Nick will tell you that law sometimes will keep you up at night. I haven't seen it, but I do believe there is an open data jail somewhere in the city. And so that's my stick. You know? So New York City, we have an open data law. So MODA, in partnership with the Department of Information Technology and Telecommunications, so you want to think of DoIT's commissioner is Ann Roast, incredibly smart person. She's the CIO for the city. We partner with DoIT to prosecute the open data law and implement the law. They're the technical side, we're the business side. And so New York City represents the gold standard in producing open data, both nationally and internationally. Our ability to work with agencies to open their data to the public puts the city far and away ahead of all cities with respect to the number of public data sets available on the portal. So you want to think about it like this. We have close to 1,500 data sets on the portal. The second closest to what we have, I believe it's a toss-up between Chicago or like San Fran or something like that. I think LA is sprinkled in there. They're in and around 500. Right? So we're sort of always in the 3X space. So far and away, we have more data than any other city in the country available in our open data forum. Our open data efforts have also earned New York City a top spot on the Sunlight Foundation's national rankings of open data cities. While we believe this in and of itself is a strong accomplishment, the open data law is not just about releasing open data sets. As stated in the open data law's declaration of legislative findings and intent, open data serves to, and I quote, streamline intragovernmental and intergovernmental communication and interoperability, permit the public to assist in identifying efficient solutions for government, promote innovative strategies for social progress, and create economic opportunities. And so MODA and DoIT are partnering to realize a vision and strategy that will allow us to achieve those stated outcomes of the law. So when I became the city's chief analytics officer, I began to get invited to a lot of city tech gatherings, and hackathons, and meetups about open data in New York City. And I began to notice that it was the same people. And then had discussions with folks, right? That, yeah, yes, this is the case. We have a lot of the same groups of folks, interested people in open data coming to these events. So, the usual suspects, right? And at the same time, I was also getting up to speed on how MODA does analytics with agencies partners, right? And I saw over and over again how we worked with agencies who weren't necessarily sold on the idea that they could use data to solve their problems, right? Or who had the opposite problem. They were super excited about using data, but not sure where to start. I saw that whenever we were successful, it was because we focused on core elements. Engage, demonstrate value, and focus on results. A very agile sort of way of doing it. So all of that says that we joke internally, we call ourselves data therapists. Right? The reason being is because we spend a lot of time sitting down with agencies and thinking about talking to them about their data. What's important about their data? How is their data important to them? Right? So we always refer to ourselves as as data therapists, right? It's like, when did the relationship between you and your data go south? It was exciting at first, but now it's getting a little stale. It caused us at Moda to ask a very simple question. Is something truly open if it is not being used and accessed by everyone? So now let me take you back to when I talked to you about my relationship with data over the years in my career. Remember, what I talked about were 2 stages. The first stage was getting the data. The second stage was getting it to someone so it can be useful in some way, whether it's data sharing, whether it's for the public good, and so on and so forth. Right? So when you look at the open data, when I came in and I looked at the open data world in New York City, we did an incredible job. And I'm sure a lot of, well, Nickon doesn't have any grades, but if he did, they would be attributed to a lot of late nights getting the open data implementation stood up. And so there was a rack 'em and stack 'em kind of mentality. Get the data from out of the agencies and get it into the portal. Get it out of the place where it has lived in various different forms, in various different complexities, get it onto the portal for the public. But that was just the start. And unfortunately, what I have seen is that sometimes people see that as the end. And so we have a responsibility, Moda and Do It, is to take it to the next phase. And that next phase is access. Getting it into the hands of the people who can use it the most. Not just putting it there and then the people who know it's there, who are looking for it, go to it. Right? And so how do we make that jump to the next phase of sharing the data, getting the data out? If only a small percentage of New Yorkers are using open data, how open really is it? Right? And that's a very important question to ask. Right? It's the if the tree falls in the forest question, right? You know, not to get all meditative deep on the guy. That's as deep as I get, is if the tree falls in the forest quote. You know, when I first started, and Stefan has heard this, so you know I'm not making this up. When I used to go around, and we had, and we continue to have a great partnership and relationship with our friends at GovLab. I used to go around when I first started, but I went around and talked about open data, what Moda needs to do, and how Moda needs to really take on this open data challenge of expanding access to open data. I used to use this metaphor. I said, you know, if I took open data, I packed it into the back of a truck, and I drove it to East New York, Brooklyn, or for those of you from MIT, Brockton, Massachusetts, or South Central LA, or Inglewood, Southside Chicago, and parked the truck and opened up the back of the truck and said, open data for everyone. It's all yours. It's all free. It's actually your data because you're a taxpayer. It's yours. Have at it. How many people would actually know what to do with that data? How many people would actually take advantage of it? Now, if I drove it into Midtown Manhattan, maybe Connecticut, NYU for certain, Columbia for sure, and did the same thing. They would go to town. Matter of fact, they come looking for us, right? So I don't have to go looking for them. And that's the problem that I saw. If we can't do that, if we can't ensure that certain communities and certain people in our communities in New York City are not using open data for what it is meant for, as stated in the law, economic progress, is it really open, right? And so, because I actually just talked a lot about it. So I then asked, right, what are we going to do about it? What happens if we take Moda values and we engage with agencies and apply them to the NYC open data? Remember I talked about this concept of we sit and we engage and we understand what agencies need and we talk to them about how we can use data to help them solve their problems, because some of them aren't solving them, right? So what if we did that in the open data space? Went to the people, not to the people who were doing this, right? It's easy to work with the agencies who were doing this to Moda. It's more of a challenge to work with the agencies who were doing this. Those are the ones we want to engage. So let's do that with open data. And so first things first, we put the person who is in charge, I put the person who's in charge of our everyday analytics work in charge of open data. Lindsay Molyneux, who's the Deputy Chief Analytics Officer, assumed leadership of the open data effort for Moda. So we took the person who does our analytics work and made her the head of our open data effort. That was like one of my, when I was here. We implemented a strategy and vision called Open Data for All. So every year, pursuant to the law, we have to release an open data plan. And so the open data plan is basically agency name, the data sets that they're going to release, and the dates when they plan to release them. So what we said was, the days of rack 'em and stack 'em, we're going to keep that going because it's been very successful. We need to have a vision. We need to have a strategy. We need to have an actual plan for expanding access to open data. And so this initiative, we're saying that open data is an invitation for anyone, anywhere, at any time to have a conversation with their government, right? And so with New York City government. In the same way that we would never tell an office or an agency that data or analytics is not helpful or relevant or interesting to them, we're doing the same for New York City as a whole. Right? Data is important to you, to everyone, every age, every community. The Open Data Plan, which was released on July 16, 2015, establishes, this is the first one ever that establishes the city's vision to deliver on the promise of open data for all, to the benefit of all New Yorkers. Just like when we engage with agencies, we laid out our goals. The Open Data Plan is our vision of what we can do and what we aim to achieve with open data. And just like when we engage with agencies, we set bold, quantifiable goals. The ultimate success of the Open Data for All initiative will not only be measured in the number of data sets that are published on the data portal, which we're winning, but in the number of New Yorkers who use open data in their daily lives. And that's not just the tech-savvy New Yorkers. It's all New Yorkers in all 5 boroughs. Right, so more specifically, to deliver on this promise, we will continue to release new data sets and identify opportunities to provide data for all types of users, focus on delivering quality data, and continue to improve and enhance the technical infrastructure that provides the foundation for the entire initiative. So we're going to expand access, deliver quality, and enhance usability. So one of the things that we saw was you have a portal that's built for data scientists. Then you wonder why only data scientists use it, right? As a software engineer, as a computer scientist, I learned very early on in my career, at Motorola used to say, they used to be able to tell the difference between a product that an engineer created and a product that, a usability expert helped to create. Those are distinctly 2 different products, right? And one that the engineer created was like a shit ton of buttons and text boxes, and it was just like, look, just put the data in. Don't worry about, if it's usable or not. These are how you put the data in, right? You have to think about your user. The question we had was, the portal that we had, who was it really built for? So that's what we talk about with usability. Have we actually gone into Brooklyn, South Bronx, and spoken to community board members and said, if you wanted to use an open data portal, what would that look like to you? What does an open data, how do you interface with the internet? How would you prefer to interface with data, right? We had never done that. We do now, as part of our open data engagement, which is part of our strategy and vision. Right? So, the piece about the quality, delivering quality, that's an interesting one too, right? So we saw a particularly interesting play there. as MODA, we know that quality comes from use. Right? We get data from agencies, we do some projects for them, they begin to understand how better to manage their data so that they can have more quality data, so that you can do more analytics and do more smart stuff. So how do we get more quality data into the open data portal? We need to get more users. We need to get more usage out of the data. And so by expanding access and expanding usage, you then begin to allow people to ask a lot more questions about the data from a lot of different spaces. And so that's how we as MODA internally, as an analytics team, ensure that we manage quality data. We're going to use the same ethos in and around data. So again, it's about expanding access and identifying usage in these communities so that you can ensure that the agencies are releasing better data of high quality. Am I doing on time?
Fine.
Okay, cool. So essentially that's where we are, right? Like I think it's a responsible use of open data to make it open data for. But then looking forward, what's next? And what's the next set of questions about responsible use of stewardship? I don't think that I need to convince anyone in this audience that data is relevant for everything. And so we lay out some examples in the plan. There are countless others that we think about every day and we engage the community about every day. But I want to talk to you about a couple. So every day New Yorkers look for New York City open data. Data is created every day by New York City government in the normal course of business. New Yorkers can use this data to make informed decisions, become more engaged in their communities, solve tough problems, or turn their dreams into a reality. When an entrepreneur decides between opening her dream business on one corner or another, she's looking for a list of business licenses newly issued by DCA and DOHM. One job plan submissions and construction permits from DOB. Range good inspections from FDNY and zoning shape files from DCP. When a journalist searches for information on a tight deadline, he's looking for data sets like collisions from NYPD that quantify results of city initiatives like Vision Zero. When a community board member considers common neighborhood complaints to decide where to invest funds or recommend renewal of a license, she's looking for a list of noise complaints from 311, parking tickets from DOT, and discretionary funding of previous years from City Council. These are things that we literally went out and talked to people about. Right? And I can't tell you how many times people are like, this thing actually exists. You must be joking. Like, this information can't be this easily accessible, right? We went to a CUNY school. One of the things that we're doing also is engaging CUNY schools in and around open data. So we met with a particular department in CUNY school, and the department head and a lot of the professors were like, open data, what's that, right? So I'll tell you what, why don't you let us come out to your school, and let's do a 2-hour, 3-hour presentation. We'll bring pizza. Because I know that's what keeps college students in the seats. We got a standing ovation at the end of the discussion, partly because I'm sure that they realized that this was going to make this was the graduate program, this was going to make their graduate theses a lot less complex than they thought it was going to be, because they were saying they can all normally, for data, they all go to the census. You just all go to the census, and anybody who's dealt with ACS data from the census, it's a bear, right? It's a monster. You got to really know what you're doing there, right? And so we introduced them to a way that they can actually graduate on time. I'm joking. No, but I'm not joking. We got a standing ovation from this group of students. Large crowd. New York City Open Data is an invitation for anyone, anytime, anywhere to engage with New York City. Some of these data sets have never been released outside a city agency before, or may have previously been available only to those who could pay for particular services, but they are now open to everyone. The promise of open data is transparent, free, accessible data. Data is more than just numbers. It's information that can create new opportunities and level the playing field for New Yorkers. It's the illumination that changes frameworks, the insights that turns impenetrable issues into solvable problems. It's the invitation for more voices to join critical conversations. It's the invitation, open data is the commitment that all of these benefits are not confined to only a select few who are in the know, or who can pay for information. They are for everyone. New York City is dedicated to putting this power into the hands of all New Yorkers. One of the big strategic questions is, when you mean all, is it really all? All right? There's an argument that I think a lot of people in this community have around open data. And I think it's a fascinating, coming from academia, having spent time in academia, I think it's a fascinating argument. I think we should pull the thread and have a true public debate around this. There's an argument that says, you know, certain people, raw data means nothing to them. What do they care about the raw data? They need the smarts and the capabilities of data scientists and people who know how to build maps with the data and do all sorts of, analysis. And that data is what's really going to be helpful. Right? What's that business owner care to see a tabular view of licenses? They want to see is a nice curated app that helps them. Right? I think there's a valid discussion there. But where MODA sits is, right? And so it's the question of not everyone can be a chef, right? Not everyone goes to the farm and gets the raw food and knows how to cook it up. But everyone should be able to enjoy a nice meal, right? So you leave it up to the expert chef to cook the meal. But the problem with that is, when you do that, you wind up having a bunch of chefs from a particular ilk who are creating meals with a particular bias in mind. And so if you don't have that diversity of chefs, then you're really not solving a lot of the challenging things that are happening, right? And so, you know, MODA stands is, let's create more diverse chefs. Let's build, let's make chefs. And the only way you can do that is making that data available. But I think that's a very fascinating discussion and debate to have. You know, should young kids from Brooklyn, New York, have to sift through raw data? Is that their thing, right? They should just be able to use apps to know more about their. As a computer scientist, as someone who's labored through computer science classes and so on and so forth, I think it's an incredible thing for people to learn how to be creators, not consumers. Right? So that's where MODA lives. I want to leave you guys, I have a couple of minutes left, and I want to leave you guys with the for what. I've learned later on in my career that it should always be a for what. And I hope this is a good charge for the next couple of days of this conference. And I will leave you guys with a for what through a story. When I was an engineer at Motorola, there was, I was, you know, one of the few, if not one of the only, sort of African-American engineers in that space. This was out of Schaumburg, Illinois. This is back when Motorola was actually a company, right? Not like this weird brand, non-existing but existing brand that it is. And so it was Bring Your Child to Work Day, right? And so I had become fast friends with one of the support staff, African-American woman, older woman. I'm fast friends with any African-American that I saw in the whole place. And so she came to me the day before, and she said, you know, I would like to bring my son in, but my job is not anything particularly interesting to him. But I would love for him to shadow you and spend a day with you. Can I bring my son in and have him spend a day with you for Bring Your Child to Work Day? I said, fine. I wasn't particularly excited about it. I think as most engineers who were as young as I was back then are particularly self-absorbed. And I was like, I'd be doing tons of work tomorrow. Now I've got some kid I gotta shuffle around. And so, but she was a great friend of mine. there's an opportunity. You know, she gave me a whole spiel about, you know, him getting an opportunity to see an African American engineer and blah, 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 blah. I said, yeah, let's do it. It comes in, Motorola has all these events and stuff for the young kids. That's it. So after about an hour and a half of him sitting in my cube staring at the program, it's like, look, it's starting to get very awkward. Let's go walk around and see things. Now, Motorola back then was a big investor in FIRST Robotics. And so they had this room where you could come in and they had all of these high school students showing off their FIRST Robotics. You know, FIRST Robotics is a Lego robotics competition, nationally known. So they had all of these kids that they sponsored from the local Schaumburg High School showing off their robots and so on and so forth, so you could bring the kids in. So I brought them into the room. So we went to this one area in the back where they had this big course, right, where they were sending the robots through. And so we went around and taking a look. Guy comes over with the robot and says, hey, I'm going to show you how this works. So puts this robot down and lets the robot go. It's supposed to go through this obstacle course. The robot doesn't quite get through that obstacle course. Kind of flubs somewhere a couple seconds in. So the young person, actually, he and I are still friends. I mean, you know, we're on Facebook together. So, but he's a Facebook friend, let me say. But so he says, the robot didn't do what it was supposed to do. Yeah, we've been having problems with that. Imagine this kid's elementary school. So, well, how about you do this? How about you take those wobbly 360 wheels, take 6 of them, put one on each corner of the robot, because it was a particularly big robot. Put one on each corner of the robot, and then attach 2 wheels to the back so that you can have, with a wire, not a wire, but some sort of attachment, so that you can have a level of dexterity, 360 capability, because then that would allow for you to go through the maze and take it. So there was a couple of kids, high school kids, FIRST Robotics high school kids standing there, and you could tell they were ready to say, that sounds like a dumb idea, right? But they were like, and they paused, and their faces were more, they had this sort of nonplussed look on their faces, and they said, about 30 seconds or so, like, that's actually a good idea. And another one is like, that actually might work, right? And so they huddled together and we scuttled off. So I'm as confused as they were, right? So I said, how do you know that? How do you know that? Your mom told me you knew nothing about technology and you were shadowing me just to, learn about engineering. He said, well, my dad is a janitor at a school. And so in the garage, whenever I help him, that's what he does. He built these mechanisms so that I can help him push stuff around the garage and push stuff around, because he's always lifting and pushing heavy things. And so that's when it dawned on me that when you have people from different backgrounds and you expose them to certain things and you allow them to use things that are reality to them to help solve what we think sometimes are really super complex things, but they can bring in their culture and their thoughts into it, we might have a really good capability of solving some tough problems. But it's when you only have a singular thought, right? That's what makes identifying solutions to problems really challenging. And so I think other spaces have done this well. Other domains have done this well in bringing in diverse thought to help solve challenges. I think technology has not done it well. The technology domain in general hasn't done it well. And I think for us, the discussions you guys are going to be having for the rest of this conference, I would like to know, when you guys come up against tough questions in around security and access and privacy, would it have been helpful to have someone who grew up in spaces and places that doesn't necessarily contribute to these conversations to contribute to the conversation? Could that have sparked possibly a different thought that would then get us to a space of solutions? And so that's my sense of the why, the so what of exposing and ensuring that we can open up open data for all. Thank you very much for your time.
Did you want to get up?
No,
Or?
no, I was just going to say, after you make your presentation, perhaps the two of you could go sit up
Oh.
front for the Q&A.
Sure.
Hi, good evening. Thank you, Dr. Mashariki. It was very insightful, very interesting to hear about your work and how it's propelled New York City to be one of the leaders, not only in the US, but around the world in terms of open data policies and implemented the open data law. Coming from California, we like to at least pretend that we're at the forefront of a lot of policies and a lot of technologies, so it's good to go around and see the work that other cities and other areas have done. I think we learned from that. Before I continue, I'd like to make a disclaimer. My opinions and whatever I say today is my own and doesn't represent the opinions of the California Public Utilities Commission. I was told by the lawyers to get that out there before I continue. So before I touch on a few of the key points that Dr. Mashariki brought up, I'd like to just give you a little bit of a background on California's open data policies and rules and regulations at the California Public Utilities Commission that revolve around releasing information. So some of you may know the state of California was one of the first states to launch an open data repository. It can be accessed at data.ca.gov. It was designed to provide a single source of raw data on California's economy, public, health, transportation, etc. While not as accessible or as slick as the website available here at in New York, it is still provides a significant amount of data that can be accessed by the public who wish to use it for improving public access, improving public infrastructure, etc. The California Public Utilities Commission actually is a little bit of a different beast. It is a state agency, but it's independent. It was established about 100 years ago, and it was established in San Francisco to be independent from the politics in Sacramento. It was probably established because of the railroads, who were at the time price gouging a lot of the farmers who were trying to get their goods to market. And so the Public Utilities Commission was established in order to provide an avenue to regulate the railroads to make sure that they provided safe, reliable, and reasonably priced service so that farmers could get their goods to market and flourish. Over the years, it's expanded. The jurisdiction is now covers telecommunications, energy. Energy takes up most of the time in the PUC because of the 2006 California Global Warming Solutions Act, which is trying to reduce California's greenhouse gas emissions. So regulating the electricity utilities is important to try and mandate renewable energy and energy efficiency. In regards to releasing data to the public, also one other thing, and I'll bring this up later on in the speech, is that we were also actually one of the first, I think the first agency to start regulating the transportation network companies. And that ties into a lot of what I think it makes up a big controversy in New York City, if I'm correct, and it's something, these issues are very similar in terms of trying to see what are the best ways to regulate that industry. But I'll bring that up later on in the speech. I just want to talk a little bit about, before I get there, about the rules and regulations of releasing information to the public. The California Constitution has set forth in Article 1, Section 3, the California Public Records Act, as well as discovery law that have been implemented specifically for the Public Utilities Commission, encourage the release of government information to the public. At the same time, you have issues regarding protection of privacy of customers, protecting confidential and proprietary information from utilities and regulated industries, as well as safety regarding both infrastructure as well as gas pipelines not being too accessible so that they can get into the hands of nefarious actors like criminals or terrorists. And so oftentimes the commission is facing that dual conflicting goal. On the one hand, releasing as much information to the public as possible, while at the same time protecting privacy and protecting the confidential and proprietary information of the utilities. And so that's, it'll be interesting to hear, maybe we can talk about this some more during the question and answer session, about New York City, whether they face similar types of laws and how they were able to overcome those laws in order to establish the open data policy that is allowed for New York to lead the nation in terms of releasing information to the public. One more quick overview I want to give you about confidentiality is that the confidentiality rules is that about 30 years ago, the Commission established a general order which utilizes and integrates all of the rules, regulations, and regulatory laws regarding release of information. And generally, what the general order calls for is the release of as much information as possible, subject to a few exceptions. And one of the major exceptions was established by statutory law under Public Utilities Code Section 583, which states that information is provided to the Commission by utilities and by regulated entities cannot be released except under an order of the Commission. And in addition, if it is released, those who release it can be subject to misdemeanor, which literally means jail time. And so that law has had the impact of really bringing to focus on those of the employees of the Commission on making sure that it ends up establishing much more of a risk-averse culture, which may be good or bad, but it's something that the Commission has to face, and as it tries to release more information, it's something that goes through the minds of policymakers every day. At the same time, the Commission recently has established and is trying to develop more rules and regulations around being able to release information, and it's currently pushing towards a rulemaking to try and make data more accessible to the public. And one way of doing that is to set up more of an opaque classification of the information that the Commission has. So the classification is to try and release and provide the public with information set into 3 separate buckets. Bucket 1 would be records and information that's always open. Bucket 2 would be information that's always closed. And bucket 3 will be information that's open but redacted, subject to confidentiality. And so that's one way the Commission is trying to establish and make its data more available to the public. In terms of past decisions, one of the most open decisions came out very recently in Decision 1405-016, which was part of the smart meter proceeding, and it provides the energy usage and usage-related data to local governments, entities, researchers, and state and federal agencies, subject to certain conditions. And those conditions generally revolve around mandating the utility and others to release that information in aggregated and anonymized format. And then if confidential information is requested, there's a form non-disclosure agreement that is also provided that kind of streamlines the process of accessing that information. So one other thing I wanted to bring up is, and I mentioned this earlier, is the whole regulations of the transportation network companies, including Uber, Lyft, Sidecar. And that relates both to issues that are faced by the Commission as well as myself, as I've taken a year off, as some of you may remember, that was mentioned earlier, to study an LLM at PC, and one of my thesis paper revolves around the data that has been collected so far. So let's take a little step back. In 2013, the Commission released rules and regulations for the transportation network companies. So it was a simple 19-point plan. The policy behind it was to primarily encourage innovation, encourage competition, while at the same time protecting public safety. And as part of those rules and regulations were written a requirement from the TNCs to provide a voluminous amount of data so that the Commission could evaluate that data to determine if more regulations needed to be implemented or less regulations needed to be implemented going forward, to see whether to make sure that the companies were complying with being a common carrier. So that ties into the research I'm working on right now, which is to analyze this data and to determine whether this data, whether this data answers questions or whether the TNCs are following the requirements of being a common carrier, which is providing universal service, so making sure that they're not discriminating against certain groups and disabled communities, pricing, as well as safety. And so the data that has been received so far is somewhat voluminous, but not too complicated. It's pretty much involves information regarding the time of each ride, visit code started at, where it ended. And so the process right now for myself and as well as the PUC is to go through this data to determine whether changes need to be made. And so that's pretty much where I am. It would be helpful afterwards when we go through a question and answer session to get some questions or any advice that people could give in regards to what issues might come up or what issues they see and what could we change that. One other question that I think Dr. Mashariki brought up, which is also very something that we also face when we deal with releasing open data information, and I'm not sure what the confidentiality rules are in New York City, but it becomes much more of a serious issue in California, which is with cybersecurity and how almost every day we hear about information being hacked and released to the public. How you deal with that situation. And it'll be interesting to hear from Dr. Mashariki is what policies New York is implementing to try to prevent that from happening. So with that, thank you, and look forward to any questions.
You want to, I don't know, sit on those seats over there? Is that all right?
Sure.
All right, questions? Yeah.
So I actually have a question.
Can you maybe identify yourself?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, if that's
Sure.
all right.
I'm Joe Raz and I work for the New York City's Taxi and Limousine Commission, so I totally want to come speak to you after all of this. Yes, you're Joe. So I actually had a question about the data that you're collecting from TNCs, and you mentioned that there's something that prohibits you guys from releasing the data that you collect. So in New York, we are subject to the Freedom of Information Law, which is a state law that the city also has to comply with. And basically it says that if we have information, we have to give it out unless it falls under one of several exceptions. So I'm just kind of curious, and especially with respect to the data that you have collected from these companies, how this all plays out, or do you have a Freedom of Information mandate or law that you're also complying with, and how does that mix with the fact that you're not allowed to and can be criminally charged if you release the data? And then follow up to that, does that mean this data that you've collected is not releasable? And sidebar to that, we are also collecting a lot of data from taxis. We have been for years, and from these companies. And we recently made a big push to make that open. So we've put it on the Open Data Portal. It's on Google BigQuery. You can download it directly from our website. That's a plug for our agency. But we're also collecting this information on pickups from Uber and Lyft, and everybody's very curious about it. That's probably the biggest FOIL request that we get right now. So I'm just kind of curious how.
Yeah, in California, we have the California Public Records Act, which is very similar.
Okay.
The problem that the commission faces is that when we provide information under the California Public Records Act, we also have statutory obligations in regards to respecting the company's proprietary information, confidential information. It doesn't mean that the information can't be released. Mm-hmm. It's the same issue that the energy companies and the electricity companies also face. The issue is, how do you release that information while protecting their privacy? And usually that can be accomplished through releasing information in an anonymized format and an aggregated format. Mm-hmm. But we don't have a third-party entity like MODA where you can actually release the information to a data analytics unit that can then integrate all that information and analyze the information and then release it in a way that both provides access to the public as well as provides protects the confidentiality of information. And that's something the commission is working through right now. For me personally, it was very frustrating because I spent the last 2 years as an advisor commissioner. I'm not sure. The way the commission works is that you have 5 advisors who are appointed by the governor, and they get, or 5 commissioners appointed by the governor. And so for me, I was actually I was involved in a lot of the writing of the TNC regulations. And even for me, even though I'm on a 1-year leave of absence, there was a lot of, I actually had to, and even though I'm not considered an employee of the commission, I still had to file an NDA, and it was kind of a laborious process to get it done. And so the commission has this risk-averse culture when it comes to this, primarily because of Section 583. And I don't want to discuss 583 about whether it's a good law or not law, but that's basically what the commission is facing, and that's kind of what the commission has to struggle with.
So are you releasing any data right now at all in any format,
Yeah.
aggregated, anonymized?
Actually, last week at the commission meeting, I think last week or a couple of weeks ago, Valerie Cow, who's the senior analyst on this project, released some information in aggregate format.
In aggregate, okay.
That showed, for example, that TNCs have exponentially grown in numbers, and at the same time that they've generally been servicing evening clientele, primarily people who go to bars and things like that. There's a few other information that just got out of that, and so it's a constantly evolving process. And so, yeah, the information is out there.
Okay.
And a lot of the information also will be released on the webpage of the California.
I'm wondering whether you've had pushback either from the privacy, because I don't really have a very concrete feel of the type of data that you're talking about, but whether these sorts of issues relating to privacy, where it may be information about individuals, but then I hadn't thought about the fact that some of the information may come from companies, commercial entities, and they may resist, they may also push back against data going onto these open portals, and whether you've had experiences like that.
No, I think the closest we get is that, in New York City we have the sort of what I think is referred to as like quasi-agencies. They're not really agencies, but they're kind of like EDC or HHC or NYCHA and so on and so forth, who are not covered under the law as a required entity with respect to the open data law. So sort of engaging them would be not dissimilar than sort of having conversations with a private entity. But we don't put any private entity data on the open data portal. All data sets come from and originate with agencies, but the closest we get is sort of engaging those quasi agencies, if you will. And so we do have some data from HHC on the portal. We've been in conversations with EDC to release some EDC data. I think in general, there's the open data law was so expansive as to what a public set is. It left room for conversation with agencies. So it allowed us to have a conversation with agencies around, we think this is a public data set, agency A. Well, agency A responds, says, not so much, we don't think so, and so on and so forth. And so we have that back and forth, and we figure out what's the best way to get that data set released. If there's PII in a particular data set, can we figure out a way to mask that or anonymize it such that we can release it, or can we aggregate it so that we can release it? And so we have it's constant conversation in and around ensuring, and we make sure that general counsels and so on and so forth are involved in all of these conversations so that we can release data that doesn't violate anyone's privacy concerns.
Yoris. And if anyone wants to raise their hand, I can also make lists and so on. So, Yoris.
Thank you both for those wonderful talks. And like one thing, like the main message of your speech, Mr. Mashariki, is basically this thing of like, who actually is going to use that data, what is the distribution of those people, and like certain communities, like you mentioned, that you expect them not to really have access or not to really benefit from those data. So as a data person, like I wonder what kind of data do you actually have about the use of those data, and what kind of, like, which communities does the data benefit? So I wonder, like, going forward, what do you see happening in your office with kind of having certain types of measurements of like who actually gets the data, you know, how, like, what kind of policy can you make on that? And I think tomorrow we're gonna have quite some discussion about how open data actually impacts people's life differently, you know, based on like data sources or all sorts of reasons, use of data. So I just wonder, what are your ideas about that, and what kind of data do you already have very concretely about it?
So the answer is, we don't have any concrete data around usage. That's the whole idea of, we released this strategic vision July 15th, and that's the whole idea of our open data engagement and citywide engagement to begin to collect that. But that gives me a great opportunity to talk about NYU GovLab. They did a incredible study, Open Data 500, in and around federal government open data and the impacts that it had, business, commerce, and so on and so forth, nationally. And so we sat down with them and said, hey, how can we think about doing something not dissimilar for New York City? Understanding, not just understanding the impact that open data can have, but trying to figure out where are the places that open data should be impactful, and ensuring that it's impactful in these communities where we would like to be more deliberate in exposing. So with the release of the Open Data Strategic Vision on July 15th of this year, starting exactly that conversation, and we're working with smarter folks than us around these things, NYU GovLab and so on and so forth. That's a big shout out to NYU.
Okay, I'll take, Jan and Yafit, maybe I'll take both questions and then turn it back to you guys.
Sure, thanks. Jan Whittington, University of Washington in Seattle. And I have a question for both of you. I really appreciate, Mr. Mashariki, the focus of your presentation being, if I could summarize it as, right, expanding the club of municipal open data. If we were to consider that a club good, and the price of entry being one's education and in contrast, Mr. Bala, the notion that the limits on sharing for the Public Utility Commission are explicit about who's in the club and who's not, right? You can join with a non-disclosure agreement if you are one of the following types of entities. I have kind of two-fold question to Mr. Bala and Mr. Mashariki. Mr. Bala, if you were going to take lessons from what Mr. Mashariki is saying, can you see the possibility for PUC to become more forward and at least making sure that all of the entities that qualify for access to PUC's data are actually receiving it, and they're aware that they have access to it, and they can kind of picture the potential uses of that data in their own understanding. So municipalities qualify as recipients to data in your club. So I'm interested in what you think are proper mechanisms for pushing data to that user group.
So,
And on the other side,
oh, sorry.
yeah,
Carry on.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mr. Mashariki, I was listening to what you were saying and thinking that I'm curious to know what perspective MODA has on the various types of making there's more than one more than one way to make data open. And you could have set up portals that allow people that allow limited access to one's personal record. And the Green Button Initiative is one of those, for example.
Or blue button.
Right? And so there's more than one way to make data open, and I kind of like to hear what you take to be Moda's perspective on those alternatives.
So can we take another question and then I'll turn it back to you and then that'll be, so we'll go a little bit, we'll run over time a little bit, I hope you'll forgive me. So Yafet, and then do you want to do a quick question and then Dan? Oh dear. Okay, quick questions and then we'll hand it back to you if that's all right.
I might need a piece of
Yeah,
paper.
this is what I was going to. Okay, go for it.
Very quickly. So I wonder if you have any policies or do you retain any proprietary interest in the data, or do you have any policies regarding secondary uses of the data for profit? For example, if there is any entrepreneur who's going to build a really fancy app to use your data and it actually amplify access, which is exactly what you're looking for, but it would be made for profit. So would there be any policies that they would have to follow, or any other conditions for such use?
Quick answer, the answer is no. It's open data, you get it, it's exactly for that, economic development.
Hi, Amin.
Hey.
I just wanted to ask you quickly, what role do you think educating the public, your truck analogy, I think is a really great one. Part of the reason, I think, that when you open up the back of that truck in one of these neighborhoods, say in the South Bronx or whatever, the reason why people might not be coming is because they don't know, they don't recognize, they don't know what that means, as opposed to Midtown, where everyone would recognize what that is. What role, and I'm not sure it's yours, you got a lot on your plate there at Moda. How do we deal with that, essentially? Or how would you think we should deal with that?
And final question?
Yeah, I think this is similar to your question. Yeah. So I'm Sina Kashif from NYU COSP Center for Urban Science and Progress, and I'm chef there. I'm like in a cooking kitchen. So I was wondering if you guys have any recipe or cookbook actually, because I think the solution is not having many chef, but rather having some cookbook or recipe that when you go and give the ingredient in Brooklyn, also give a book and say, here's how you can cook. Because I think that's the biggest challenge.
Okay, this is really the last question.
Hi, Sam. I was just wondering if Moda works with the city's archives at all, or if you just focus on agencies that are a continuing source of data.
Okay, so now back to Nikki and Anna.
So let me start from bottom up. One, we work with any agency, any organization, city organization that has a particular mission, has a mission for enhancing the quality of life in New Yorkers. So wherever any agency has data that has a mission or goal or KPI that drives towards that, we're excited. We figure out ways to try to work with them. So that for any agency, any organization, and so on and so forth, nonprofit, private, we try to build partnerships. Cookbook, I saw Stefan sort of smiling there. We're actually, again, that's one of the things that, along with, a piece of paper, shelfware that you can put up a strategic plan and, the strategic vision, it's a X number of pages thing that we released. It's just words on the paper. We've been talking to smart folks, again, like GovLab and others, to figure out ways to make that happen, and one of them is exactly that. I think we're referring to it as sort of a value mapping exercise, where we say, if you've got data, because Moda has done it countless times over and over again, GovLab has done it, where you've got data, you've got a use case. How do you then fill in the gaps and build a capacity that uses that data to help solve this particular challenge out of this use case. But there's been no, your cookbook analogy is perfect. There's been no documentation abstracted out such that we can go to neighborhoods and say, if you've got access to the open data portal, which you do, and you understand challenges in your community, here's how you begin thinking about taking data that you have access to and getting it to an app, some sort of tool to solve those problems. So the answer is yes, yes, yes. And by the way, that's Dawn Barber. She's a fellow commissioner, a COPIC commissioner, so she's helping to think about a lot of these information challenges in and around the city. So to Dawn, and then I'm going to answer the question about the open data portal, and it's all yours. Yes.
I think we have the same challenge on COPIC.
That's right.
So.
That's right. I think that is a citywide challenge. I think the mayor's clarion call around equity has given people a large umbrella with which to engage under. MODA, we've taken on the Open Data for All. Department of Ed has taken on the Computer Science for All. And so, and I know Do It, along with MOTI, has taken on the Broadband for All. And so there are efforts, but I think they should remain concerted and integrated so that we can, because there's a lot of education, you're 100% correct, there's a lot of education, and there's a lot of smarts, a lot of stuff that needs to happen in order to make this happen. And this is good, so thank you for your question around the types of open data. I think the answer to that is we don't know, and that's the problem. We don't know the full breadth of the types of ways that we should be opening up data and exposing data, and that's why we're having, when we release the plan, we say we're gonna go on an open data engagement tour, if you will, a citywide engagement, where we're talking not only to people in the community, but small companies and organizations who think about data and so on and so forth, so we get a better sense of how do we get this data to the people that want it. It should not just be, one, if you do not know how to navigate this open data portal, well then you're just out of luck. It should not be that space. But we can't make decisions about other mechanisms to access data without understanding who wants to access data, without opening it up to allow more people to think about accessing data and understand how they would want to access that data, and then begin making decisions. It's just like you don't start building something without a set of requirements, right? And so we want to understand the need that people have, and then begin to look for those different ways to open it. But the answer to your question is, I wouldn't pretend to know all of the different ways, and that's a problem.
Nikki? Sorry.
I think Dr. Mashariki pretty much touched on most of the main points. But one thing I'd like to address is the issue that was brought up about how to broaden access to the data, and this whole idea of in-group and out-group. Generally, I don't know, there is no such thing as an in-group and out-group, right? I mean, as far as access to data by the public, that goes back to the California Constitution. It's a right of every citizen. I think the bigger challenge is how do you develop a procedure and how do you develop the technology to expand that access to the data. And I think this is something where California can learn from New York City and how to implement those procedures.
Well, thank you so much for opening the conference and covering issues that are going to be covered tomorrow in greater depth. I could not have asked you to do more than you did in just identifying so many of the values of open data, the constraints and responsibility and access and so on. And so just to remind everybody, there's breakfast at 8:30 and we'll start the proceedings punctually at 9. Thank you so much, and to our speakers.